However, out of all of those different training variables, there is actually one that is perhaps the most important training variable that you will need a good amount of variety in, and that is the actual exercise selection itself. So while if you are a strength trainer or a powerlifter or trying to become one, there will be certain exercises that are most important to master and hit PRs in because they are the exercises that are used in competitions. When it comes to muscle building, doing a variety of different exercises and exercise techniques is key to hypertrophy. You don't build a big chest by just doing flat bench press, okay? And you don't build a big back by just doing deadlifts, all right? And the reason for this is because the muscle fibers are being recruited in the exact same way every time you are doing the same exercise, which the muscle will adapt to and master without having to grow fully in all of its different parts, okay? It's only going to grow in the way that it needs to for that exercise. So for instance, with flat bench press, you're probably mainly going to be growing the very center of the muscle and not much of the surrounding area. In order to grow the muscle fully in all areas, you need to recruit all of the different parts of it and all of the different muscle fibers in it. This can only be done by varying your exercises and exercise techniques, which, if you are strength training, will actually also develop more overall strength as opposed to a very movement specific strength. Because again, if you're only doing straight flat bench press, you're only getting strong when doing this. But when it comes to doing other movements for your chest, you're not going to have that same strength. That strength is only going to be specific to that movement. This all was proven by a study that was done by Rodrigo Fonseca, Hamilton Rochelle, Valmar Tricoli, Eduardo Souza, Jacob Wilson, Gilberto Laurentino, Andre Ajera, and Alberto Souza Leao, and Carlos Agrinovich, titled "Changes in Exercises Are More Effective Than in Loading Schemes to Improve Muscle Strength." So while I'm primarily teaching this for hypertrophy, here we have a study showing that changing the exercise selection is actually more effective in building strength than increasing the load. So what does that tell you? And this is a very interesting study. In this study, there were 5 groups of people to be tested, made up of 4 experimental groups and 1 control group. These 4 experimental groups were to be tested using intensity or loading or weight and exercise selection. The intensity or loading could either be constant and unchanging or varied, and the exercise selection could either be constant and unchanging or varied. The experimental groups were made up of Group 1, a group that did constant exercise intensity, meaning loading, and constant exercise selection. Group 2, which did varied intensity and constant exercise. Group 3, which did constant intensity and varied exercise, and Group 4, which did varied intensity and varied exercises. And after the testing, both of the groups with the exercise variation experienced more hypertrophy than the others. And with the quadriceps muscle being the muscle that was tested, these 2 groups showed growth in all 4 of the quadriceps, whereas the other 2 groups only had growth in the vastus intermedius and vastus lateralis, but did not see growth in the rectus femoris or the vastus medialis. Thus, this proves that using a limited exercise selection seriously limits your muscle recruitment, and entire heads of your muscles can be marginalized. And this isn't just proven in this one study, right? These findings have been confirmed in other studies, such as one called "Does Performing Different Resistance Exercises for the Same Muscle Group Induce Non-Homogeneous Hypertrophy?" And in this study, 2 different groups of untrained people were tested, right? And they trained at 3 times a week for 9 weeks, and volume, or the amount of work done, and intensity, or the loading, were equated between both groups, all right? They all were doing the same amount of work at the same weight. However, one group had varied exercises and the other didn't. And again, the group with the varied exercises experienced muscle growth in all parts of the muscle, and the other did not. Surprise, surprise. And so you see, this is because muscles are not meant to be moved only in one way. They have a wide array of movements they can make across multiple planes. So you must use different movements and angles when training them. All right, your chest is not only meant to do this with your arms. Your chest is responsible for any kind of pushing and adduction movements. So since your muscles are not like some sort of mechanism that is only meant to move one way, like a hinge on a door. You need to employ the different movements that they can make in your training in order to fully develop them. This point is best put by Dr. Brad Schoenfeld, who's done some of the most modern research in hypertrophy, and who stated in a study of his, which I quoted him on earlier, in which he specifically says to use different planes and angles. And he also said the same thing in different words in a 2010 study, where he said exercises should be varied in a multiplanar, multi-angled fashion to ensure maximal stimulation of all muscle fibers. So folks, when you're doing research and combing through the scientific literature and you see the same facts and evidence shown repeatedly in different studies proving and replicating the same results multiple times, and the same data coming up, and the same things being stated in quotes by researchers and professors and doctors, then what you have here is significant evidence that this is a very fundamental principle that can be considered truth. And in the way of anecdotal evidence, when I discovered all of this and I personally started using a wide variety of different exercises for each muscle group rather than just a few, I too can attest to the power of exercise variation, because I started seeing much more rapid and full muscle development. All right, there's a huge difference in the way that I look now versus the way that I looked back when I trained in a much more minimalistic fashion when it came to my exercise selections. All right, so variety of exercise selection and different technique when doing the same exercise, since when doing flat bench press, for instance, you can utilize different arm movement in order to recruit your chest muscles differently. Okay, you could go close grip, you could go wide, you could do it with dumbbells and use a twist like this, or use a arc like that. So not only are there different exercises for each muscle, there's different exercise techniques for each exercise. And having a variety of each is key to hypertrophy. Just keep in mind that there is a line here. You don't need, for instance, 25 different exercises for your chest. But don't worry about how much variety and which exercises you should and shouldn't be doing. In this program, I'm going to be teaching you all of the different exercises and exercise techniques that you need to target all of the parts of your muscle groups for the most hypertrophy.